I always thought it was strange how the squids in Bikini Bottom act superior to everyone else, to the point that they built their own suburb with the sole purpose of keeping every other species out. But it's all fake. Tentacle Acres looks great, but everyone there seems to live a similar lifestyle to Squidward, implying that most, if not all of them, have the same income as a fast food cashier. Plus, we see in the world of SpongeBob that the upper class, the politicians, and the majority population are primarily made up of fish, with squids holding far less power in underwater society than their behavior would have you believe. It's true that Squilliam Fancyson has wealth, but he's shown to be the exception, not the rule. This bad attitude seemed to come out of nowhere, which didn't sit right with me. So I looked through the show for answers and came to a massive revelation. Squidward, and the rest of his species, are all descendants of the Atlanteans, which means they were once part of the most powerful empire in the ocean. Let's start with the obvious fact. Squidward is not a squid. Real-life squids have cone-shaped heads with fins on the sides to help them swim. But Squidward species have heads that are more rounded and don't have fins. We can even see in the show that there are true squids that have this accurate head structure. This could mean that Squidward is actually an octopus. After all, when he's portrayed realistically, he does take on more octopus-like features. But in the normal style of the show, we see what actual octopuses look like in the world of SpongeBob. They have 8 arms, no nose, and don't have a human-like posture like Squidward. And more importantly, Squidward in his normal style has tentacles. Tentacles are paddle-shaped and have suckers at the end. Octopuses don't have tentacles. They have 8 arms, which are more cone-shaped and have suckers all along them. That means Squidward species have traits that make them neither squid nor octopus. And in my research, there absolutely hasn't been a cephalopod with 0 arms and 6 tentacles if we want to take the show's style more literally.
Especially if you're green and have 6 tentacles.
Which could suggest that Squidward's biology comes from a whole other planet. Now, this sounds like a massive leap in logic, until we look at the Atlanteans. They came to Earth from their homeworld over 1 million years ago. And if you compare Squidward to an Atlantean, a squid, and an octopus from the world of SpongeBob, you can see Squidward most closely resembles the Atlantean. They share light blue skin color, have long downward pointed noses, and have wider lips as well. But the similarities are more than skin deep. It's notable that all the squids in SpongeBob seem to have a taste for European art and culture, significantly more than the other residents of the ocean. Squidward makes paintings based on a variety of European styles. He also enjoys listening to and playing Western classical music. Meanwhile, Squilliam's home interior is filled with European architecture and decorations. And the most famous musician among Squidward species is Kelpie G, who plays a clarinet, an instrument that was invented in Germany. This is significant because the Atlanteans are the only other species in SpongeBob that have this much influence from European culture. The first thing SpongeBob and his friends do in Atlantis is crash into the front garden, and Squidward is the only one to point out that they destroyed the Atlanteans' topiary garden, which is a form of landscaping art that originated in France. The leader of the Atlantean people also wears heels, which were popular among European aristocrats in the 17th century, and the art produced by the Atlanteans are heavily influenced by different styles from Europe. Even the Atlanteans' focus on art and the pursuit of knowledge is reminiscent of the Renaissance. So we have 2 species in the world of SpongeBob that have similar facial features, interests, and cultures. And maybe that's why Squidward is the only one who actually gets along with the Atlantean people. Mr. Krabs wants to collect money, Sandy is left alone in their lab to invent things, and SpongeBob and Patrick try to get away from the tour to see the oldest bubble. None of them interact with other Atlanteans to get what they want, but Squidward wants to know more about the Atlantean culture. This leads him to interact with other Atlanteans, and even join a group painting session. Squidward even has a new painting to show for his time spent with the Atlanteans. And do you notice anything strange about this painting? Like the canned bread in the foreground? This is one of Squidward's favorite food items, which at the time the special aired, had only appeared in one other episode, the one where Squidward moved to Tentacle Acres. This isn't a common product in SpongeBob either, with Squidward implying it's difficult to find.
I'll bet they won't have... Wow, they have it! Canned bread!
Yet it's always available in a town made up of his species. Of all the episodes the writers could have called back to in the Atlantis special, why the one with Tentacle Acres? I think this detail could have been intentional, because when you look at Tentacle Acres, it has a striking resemblance to Atlantis. It's worth noting that these are the only 2 cities in SpongeBob that actively close their doors to outsiders.
We're sorry, but your kind isn't allowed here.
Dispose of this quickly. We can't survive any more visitors like these.
Then there's the Golden Gate surrounding Tentacle Acres, which is similar to how Squidward describes Atlantis as a city paved with gold to Mr. Krabs. But this doesn't describe the current Atlantis, it describes the version of Atlantis before they put aside their desires for wealth. With all the similarities that Squidward and his species have with Atlanteans, we can either say that this is a massive coincidence, or that Squidward and his species are actually Atlanteans who were exiled long ago, and have tried to build their own version of Atlantis in the form of tentacle acres. But that can't be possible, right? Just zoom out and look at Squidward and the Atlanteans. They can't possibly be related because the Atlanteans have human-like arms and legs instead of tentacles. Or do they? Because we see from the show that these aren't the Atlanteans' original bodies. The brain containers on their heads are the most obvious giveaway. But on top of that, we see that the Atlantean guards have steel chains for their arms and metal spikes coming out of their tails. Plus, the guards' bodies can retract into a ball to roll around, in a way that seems closer to a robot retracting its body instead of an animal curling into a ball. This shows that while the Atlanteans are biological creatures who still eat and have their internal organs, they're basically piloting robot bodies. But why would the Atlanteans make their robotic bodies look different than how they naturally look? If they are the same species as Squidward, wouldn't their new bodies look similar to Squidward's current body? Not necessarily. The Atlanteans could just as likely want to make their bodies resemble the gods that they worship. Alright, time to flex my minor in religious studies. Body modification is a religious practice of changing one's appearance as a mark of faith. These can range from simple cosmetic changes like clothing, hairstyles, facial markers, and jewelry, but can also include more permanent changes, like tattoos, piercings, scarification, and that little barbershop visit for baby boys. These are all incredibly common practices in religion, and the Atlanteans seem to have their own versions of them as well. In both the past and present, we see that the Atlantean leaders are the only ones with orange hair, the same hair color as Neptune, the god of the ocean. This suggests that the Atlantean leaders modify their hair color to resemble the gods as a display of their position of authority. And if the Atlanteans are already modifying their bodies with robotics and practicing body modification for religious purposes, it wouldn't be a stretch to think that they designed their bodies to resemble the gods they worship. After all, SpongeBob takes place in a world where Greek and Roman mythology is real. There's Neptune, god of the ocean, and he mentions the existence of Apollo, the Greek god of music and the sun.
A prize worthy of Apollo.
On top of that, there are monsters in the show pulled right out of Greek and Roman mythology, like the underwater Cyclops SpongeBob and Patrick find in an abyss. And fun fact, Cyclops are the children of Poseidon, the Greek name for Neptune, which adds a whole layer to this monster being abandoned in a trench, but let's not worry about that. Then there's the flashback of the Atlanteans bringing the oldest bubble to Earth, which has quite a few references to ancient Roman culture. First, there's the Atlantean leaders wearing galea, those crested helmets that Roman soldiers would wear. There's also the alien elephants, which seem random at first, but elephants in ancient Rome represented both military might because of their size and strength, as well as cultural exchange, since they were often received as gifts from visiting nations. And what do we see here with the elephants? A scene that expresses both the military might of the Atlanteans while they're moving the most important piece of their culture to Earth. The Atlanteans were already augmenting their bodies, as shown in that flashback, and they probably modeled their robotic bodies to resemble how most of the Roman gods appeared, like Neptune's brother Jupiter, better known as Zeus. And if Neptune is humanoid, but with a fin to swim in the ocean, it would make sense that the other gods would be humanoid, just with legs and feet. Now, none of this outright proves that the Atlanteans would look like Squidward without their body modifications, but it means it's at least a possibility. And considering all the other similarities these two species share, I'm convinced that Squidward's species are descendants of the Atlantean people. But that still leaves us with a big question. Why would they leave such a shining paradise? Well, the show gives us a pretty clear answer. Squidward's ancestors rejected the world's oldest bubble. According to the leader of the Atlanteans, LRH, the Atlanteans brought this little bubble from their homeworld over 1 million years ago across billions of light years. And what is something that Squidward, and presumably the rest of his species, despises? Bubbles.
That's just annoying, blowing bubbles. That's the lamest idea I have ever heard.
Yet despite hating bubbles, Squidward also shows that he has a natural talent for making them. He's able to blow a bubble that not even SpongeBob, a professional bubble blower, was able to produce. But it's Squidward's response after blowing his mega bubble that's interesting.
Come on, it's in my genes.
He confidently says that bubble blowing is in his genes. That's an odd thing for someone like Squidward to say, but it is something you would probably hear from an Atlantean, whose biology had millions of years to evolve in a bubble-centered culture.
I rock.
What I think happened was that a small group of Atlanteans rejected the oldest bubble. The other Atlanteans didn't respond well to this heresy, and this bubble-hating faction was exiled from Atlantis. The exiled Atlanteans were left without their augmentations, forcing them to live in their completely natural forms. So much time passed that the exiled Atlanteans may have even forgotten their origins, but never dropped that attitude of superiority. They tried to build their own version of Atlantis, with the sole purpose of rejecting the creatures they perceived as inferior to them. But these former Atlanteans spent so much time preserving what they perceived as self-perfection that they didn't make any of the achievements that existed in Atlantis. They built their new empire to resemble a past that doesn't exist anymore. And now, Squidward's species only has a lingering sense of superiority with nothing really to show for it. And everyone just started calling these creatures squids because that was what they looked most like. And what's saddest of all is that this troubled past has an effect on Squidward. He constantly feels like there's something missing in his life. At first, Squidward thinks going to Tentacle Acres is everything he wanted, except he quickly learns how stagnant that place is. It was only when Squidward went to Atlantis that he felt like he truly belonged. But at the end of the episode, while everyone is singing about leaving Atlantis, Squidward has this line to add.
And back to my depressing life of quiet desperation.
Unlike the other characters, Squidward never felt fulfilled or happy in his normal life. It makes you wonder why Atlantis had an amulet meant to bring outsiders to their city in the first place. Maybe they had sympathy for the ones they exiled, and gave them a way to come home if they truly wanted. But Squidward's species is shown to be stubborn and proud, so they rejected the gift. Years passed, and the original reason for creating the amulet was probably forgotten by both the Atlanteans and the exiles. But even if the Atlanteans forgot the purpose of sending the amulet, they remembered that they needed to give a warm welcome to whoever found it and invite them into their otherwise isolated empire. This amulet could have been meant for Squidward to find, and the tragedy is that this simply wasn't meant to be. Squidward was sent away from Atlantis, and any chance of healing the wounds of the past shattered when SpongeBob and Patrick popped Atlantis' most important relic. Atlantis' doors once again closed to outsiders, this time with no way for anyone to enter, which means the past is never going to be reconciled. The exiled Atlanteans are left clinging to this past version of Atlantis, and keep perpetuating this idea that they're better than everyone else, missing out on all the amazing things that exist in the world around them. And none of them will ever find satisfaction unless they can drop their pride, open up to others, and accept something better than the stuffy world they've built around themselves.